Today we're talking about the Istp personality. What does it stand for? What are the cognitive functions that describe this personality type? What are the strengths and weaknesses of this type? And which other types does the Istp naturally relate to in a positive way? All about that in the next minutes. Please do not forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. Okay, so first of all, let's just go briefly through the 4 letters that describe this personality type. Again, remember from my previous videos, the letters themselves do not really truly explain any personality type. They just give us a very broad idea about certain tendencies and characteristics. It is actually the cognitive functions that really enable us to dig deeper and understand how mental processes relate to each other in the case of every personality type. So first of all, we have I, which stands for introversion. This means that the Istp is more likely to draw their energy from the inside rather than the outside. Then we have S, which stands for sensing. Sensing means that the Istp's natural preference or tendency is to process information initially by focusing on concrete, pragmatical things rather than just abstract ideas and concepts. Then we have T, which stands for thinking. This means that in the case of the Istp, they're more likely to make decisions by prioritizing objective data, logical things, anything that they can perceive in a logical, analytical, and objective way. This does not mean that they not care about feelings. It's just that when they make decisions, they're more likely to be interested to see the actual data and facts. And lastly, we have P, which stands for perceiving. This means that, generally speaking, the Istp feels more comfortable in an environment that allows for spontaneity and flexibility, and also for openness. It's important for them to not have a very strict and rigid environment, but actually one in which they can move around and leave things open, leave things flexible, because that's how they feel most comfortable. Okay, so how about the cognitive functions that describe the Istp personality? Well, first of all, the dominant function is introverted thinking. This is a function that we haven't yet talked about in a dominant way. We've touched upon it in types like ENTP, INFJ, ISFJ, ESFJ. But in the case of the Istp, this is actually the dominant function. So how does it work? How does it function? If you remember from my previous videos, introverted thinking is basically concerned with what works for oneself. So an Istp will naturally ask the question, what works for me, in a logical, analytical, objective way. They might find it difficult to make decisions based on their own feelings and values because they're not naturally in tune with how they feel in a subjective way. It's much easier for them to understand themselves in a logical way. So they will direct their attention in their selves in order to understand how things relate to each other in a bigger framework. And TI, or introverted thinking, is also concerned with understanding systems. They're natural troubleshooters because they understand that within any system, and that system could be the human body, it could be a car, it could be some sort of algorithm, it doesn't matter, but they understand the system and they understand how the parts within the system interact with each other. They're really, really good at that. And of course, other personality types can also do it. It's just that introverted thinking seems to be the pro in these kinds of situations. So this analytical approach to life will probably benefit them, especially when they can troubleshoot something and understand how things actually work. The secondary or auxiliary function of the Istp personality is extraverted sensing. If you remember from the INFJ video, for example, or the ENTJ video, extraverted sensing is all about living in the moment. It's all about taking action. And the Istp is naturally good at using their senses, so extraverted sensing, in order to understand and relate to the world around them. Again, this helps with the troubleshooting thing because it enables them to live in the present, connect with what is going on right here, right now, and decide what the best course of action is. It can make them rather spontaneous, and it can make them prone to just embarking on an adventure. But it also makes them good at dealing with objects, manipulating objects, understand how objects work in a practical way. And I really like to believe that because this is the auxiliary function of the ISTP, so probably the healthiest function in the ISTP, this is the key to their mental health. Just as extroverted feeling is the key to the mental health of INFJs or ISFJs, extroverted sensing seems to be the key to balancing out their analytical approach to life, because it directs their attention from the inside to the outside in the real world where things actually happen. And if they can engage with this function, they feel much better. So for example, it could be building something, fixing something, traveling, simply going in nature and connecting with their senses, or simply taking action rather than overanalyzing things. And this is really helpful to them, usually. So someone asked on Instagram, what does an ISTP feel happy doing? Well, this could be one of the things that helps them feel better, because they enjoy interacting with the real world in a practical way. And this could be one of the ways in which an ISTP feels good. Of course, also understanding systems, being analytical and understanding how things work tends to also be an interest of the ISTP personality. But apart from that, of course, there's plenty of individual differences. Okay, next we have introverted intuition. This is a function that the ISTP can use rather well. But of course, because it's not one of the first two functions, sometimes it's difficult to access it. If you remember from the previous videos, Introverted Intuition is all about looking into the future, envisioning things, predicting things, and also kind of making sense of the chaos of ideas and concepts, having a synergistic approach to understanding concepts and ideas. The ISTP can do it, and sometimes they really enjoy it. And as long as they can balance this out with their extroverted sensing, they actually get very good at perceiving and understanding things from a broader perspective. Because their extroverted sensing enables them to focus on what is going on right here, right now, and kind of being adapted to the real world, whereas introverted intuition enables them to look into the future, to anticipate, to predict, to bring out their conceptual side. And a rather healthy ISTP will be able to deal with the two in a rather balanced way, and this is helpful to them and their mental health. Okay, and lastly we have extroverted feeling. This is the soft spot, the inferior function of the ISTP, and they might not always feel very comfortable using this function, because as introverted thinking really dominates their psyche, and this is the cognitive function that they feel most comfortable using, extroverted feeling comes into play in terms of how the ISTP relates to other people. Remember, it's a function that is mainly concerned with how other people feel and what is important to other people, and also it kind of helps with empathy in many situations. And while the ISTP can definitely focus and understand the feelings of other people, this might not feel very comfortable to them. So it might bring along anxiety, it might bring along a tendency to try to run away from feelings because they do not feel comfortable becoming vulnerable around other people. And depending on how much they're interested in working with themselves to balance out this idea, they will get better at simply dealing with their emotions, talking about their emotions, expressing their emotions. They might have the most difficulty talking about their emotions, and that's because they have difficulty accessing introverted feeling, which is about the feelings that someone experiences themselves, and directing our attention towards how we feel and what is important to us and what our values are. And this is really difficult for the ISTP. Someone asked me this on Instagram, how do you make an ISTP talk about their feelings? Well, I would say that they sometimes have real difficulty doing it simply because they're not really in tune with how they feel. So they focus more on what their thoughts are, what their thought process is, and they have to make a really big conscious effort in order to arrive at a conclusion about how they really feel. So that's why probably they find it difficult to do it. I wouldn't say that anyone can make them talk about their feelings. It's mainly a thing about how mature they are, how well developed they are, and how willing they are to engage in a little bit of introspection. But probably also feeling comfortable around other people helps with this entire process. Okay, so with respect to what you guys have asked me on Instagram, one of the questions was, how does an ISTP act when they have a crush? Well, of course, this really depends on any individual and their experience with life and their maturity level. But there is a tendency, due to their inferior extroverted feeling, to feel rather nervous and anxious around their crush, to feel like this is not something they're really comfortable expressing, so they might pretend like they don't feel anything, or they might just look a little bit nervous. Also, another question that you guys have asked me is, how do you befriend an ISTP and what do they care about in a friendship? Generally speaking, because of their introverted thinking preference, I would say that the ISTP feels better around people with whom they can have intellectual conversations with whom they can debate things, with whom they can also engage in practical adventures. And this is mainly due to their extraverted sensing, because they enjoy exploring, they enjoy trying out new things, and being around people who also enjoy doing that usually makes them feel happy. And also, one other question that you guys have asked me is, what is the sense of humor that is typical to ISTPs? Again, I would say this is something that is specific to an individual. However, I have noticed a tendency for ISTPs to prefer sarcasm and subtle humor. And it's probably associated with their introverted thinking combined with introverted intuition. Okay, and now lastly we have type compatibilities. What other types does the ISTP naturally relate to? Well, the theory, or the stereotypical theory, as I say, tends to say that ISTPs get along the best with other types that have a preference for dominant thinking. So those are INTP, ENTJ, and ESTJ. However, in my opinion, as mentioned in all of the previous videos about personality types explained, it is quite interesting to observe any personality type and how they relate to those other personality types that share the same preference for the 4 cognitive functions. So in this case, it would be introverted thinking and extraverted feeling, introverted intuition, and extraverted sensing. And the other types that make use of these 4 functions in a, let's say, dominant way, in a conscious way, are ESTP, INFJ, and ENFJ. And these are other types that the ISTP can find a lot of common ground with. On the other hand, when it comes to people that the ISTP has the most difficulty relating to, I would say that normally those are INFP and ENFP. Again, that's not to say that an ISTP cannot have a successful relationship or friendship with INFPs or ENFPs. It's just that because they're polar opposites in terms of cognitive functions and in terms of preference for sensing and thinking versus intuition and feeling, this might cause a lot of difficulty with understanding each other and relating to each other. And they might need to work a little bit more on how they communicate and how they send ideas to each other. Because the NFP preference for introverted feeling might really confuse the ISTP, whereas the ISTP's preference for introverted thinking might actually confuse ENFPs and INFPs. But again, it's not a general rule. So thank you guys, thank you a lot for watching. I'm very happy that you've been together with me on this journey of exploring personality types. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and see you next week with another video on the ESFP personality type.